Hi, everybody. Hello, it's Hilary here from We Love Smart Keto, coming in to talk to you today about the Processed Food Index, which is a very interesting way of looking at some aspects of keto, which I really like to share with you today. So give me a 1 in the comments if you're watching live, or a 2 if you're watching on the replay. I know we've got some regular watchers of this stream, so it'll be really great to know that you're here. So what we're talking about today is processed food index, and what that means for keto. And it's probably a type of index that not many of you have heard of. We've heard of the glycemic index, which is a common index that we hear about used, which is about how fast your body processes carbohydrates. Not so relevant for keto because it's so very low carbs in keto, but certainly the processed food index is something that's really interesting to think about. And in fact, some countries like France are actually already using the processed food index, and they have a goal to reduce the amount of ultra processed food that people eat by 20%, so reducing it by 1/5 by 2022, which is only a couple of years away. So that's a really interesting. So it's intriguing, isn't it, to learn a little bit about what the processed food index is. So give me a comment if you already know about the processed food index. Put heard of it, or I know it in the comments, or if it's new to you, put new in the comments, and that would be really great for me to understand a little bit about how much you know or have heard of the processed food index. So let me tell you a little bit about what it is. So it's pretty much whether food is recognizable as food or not is probably the simplest way of putting it. And there's 4 groups, but it's not necessarily just a strict ladder, and it's not necessarily the case that every group is bad. Every group has its place. So group 1 is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So a cucumber, for example, or a tomato, that would be an unprocessed food. A minimally processed food would be, when you go to the butcher and you buy a frozen chicken, that chicken has been frozen and is still very much recognizable as the original food. Similarly with nuts, if you go and buy some nuts, they've probably been shelled or hulled, and they may have been roasted. So that's minimally processed food. Yes, so Alex is saying that you've heard a little bit about it, but not much. Well, hopefully I'll help you learn a little bit more about it today, Alex. So as we said, group 1 is the unprocessed or very minimally processed. So when you go in, you recognize what it is, as a piece of food. Maybe somebody's put it in a bag. Maybe they've taken the chickpeas. Well, we're not really eating chickpeas on keto, but maybe they've taken the sunflower seeds. They're shelled and they've been put in a bag, and you can buy them in the bag, but you can still recognize that they're sunflower seeds. So that's group 1. Group 2 is culinary ingredients, so things that you use for cooking. So things that you wouldn't eat just on their own, or not generally, but that you would put into your cooking. So in terms of keto, that's things like oil. So that's olive oil, for example, minimally processed. Not true for some of the seed oils. Then we try not to use those on keto, but something like an olive oil has just been pressed, put in a bottle. We don't generally glug olive oil. We use a bit of it in our cooking and our salad dressing, but it's not a primary ingredient. Salt as well, that's a group 2. It's something that we add to our food to make it more tasty, to make it more palatable, but it's not particularly something that we wouldn't just eat it on its own. Something like vinegar as well, which we do use quite a bit, things like a balsamic vinegar, or an apple cider vinegar that you might use if you're making a broth. That as well is, it's a culinary ingredient. You can't really drink vinegar on its own in any kind of quantity. So that's group 2. So it's things that we use to cook and process our foods. So group 3 is processed food, but again, not necessarily bad, and has its place. So Group 3 is generally either to make the food last longer. So, for example, when you get vegetables in a can, they've been put in there to preserve them and to make them last longer. Or pickles, for example, where they've been put in a jar, you can still recognize them as pickles. They've had some of the group 2, so some salt and perhaps some vinegar added to them. But they're still, they're processed, but they're still, recognizable as to what they are. So that's one part of group 3. And the other part of group 3 is the things like breads, right? So things that are, have been changed to make them more palatable, but they're still fundamentally the original ingredient. So another one would be cheese, where that's, cream and milk products that have been processed and turned into something. It's still effectively, the original product. It's just been fermented and changed. Similar with yogurt. It's still milk, but it's just been undergone a process. But it's still pretty natural. And we would use it in cooking, but we might not actually make. I make my own yogurt, but not everybody would make it themselves at home. So that's the third group. So tell me, out of those 3 groups, 1, 2, and 3, where do you eat most out of? Here in We Love Smart Keto, I definitely encourage people to eat as much as possible out of group 1, out of really recognizable products where you effectively have to make them yourself. For me, I'll often have a Greek salad, which is feta cheese, which is group 3, has some olive oil and some balsamic vinegar, which is group 2, and then the rest will be vegetables, and I might throw some chicken that I've cooked in there as well, for example. So I'm sort of eating out of groups 1, 2, and 3. So group 4, which is the interesting group, which is the group that the government in France is definitely trying to reduce, is the ultra processed food. So those are the chips that you go and buy, the bag of chips that have got all sorts of ingredients like whey powder and things that you would not cook with at home, maybe casein, flavorings, things that we wouldn't have in the cupboard at home. I think is the easiest way that I think, maybe they're made into a fancy shape, like a Cheerio, for example, definitely in the ultra processed food category. And there's some estimates. There's one study that looked at how much food people in the US in general eat out of category 4. What percentage of food do you think that study came up with? How much of people's diet comes from that ultra processed group? I'll tell you the answer in a minute, but I'd just be interested if you pop in the comments, do you think it's 10%, 20%, 50%, 80%? What percentage of food in general do people in the US eat out of that ultra processed category? And so with that ultra processed category, there's potentially some it's had the nutrients taken out of it often in the process of cooking and processing. And so there is some indication that some adverse diseases are implicated with some of those ultra processed foods. I think the evidence is not strong enough to say that there's a direct link, but there's some connection with poor diet and adverse health outcomes. So I'd be interested to know. Yes, so let's have a look. Alex eats group 1 mainly with some 2 and 3. Well, I think that's a pretty good mixture, Alex, and that's what I aim at as well. To try and have as little as possible out of that group 4. I will tell you actually what percentage it is that this study said that people in the US in general eat out of the ultra processed, and that's 60% of their food. So more than half of what people are eating is coming out of that ultra processed category, which can't be good. They're not eating things directly out of the cupboards that they have to cook themselves, and the fridge that they cook themselves. So what we're aiming here at We Love Smart Keto is, we might not all be the world's greatest cooks, and often we're in a bit of a hurry, but just to have a bit of a focus of eating out of those first groups. So for most things for group 4, keto, really pushes you into groups 1, 2, and 3. But there are, hi, Diane. Yes, it is a bit shocking. And Diane, I'd still have to send you that voucher. I haven't forgotten. It is coming. I just haven't had a chance this morning. It's been a bit crazy here in Australia at the moment with all the our lockdown rules are changing yet again today. So we've all been trying to sort that out, but it is on its way to you. Yes, so we generally try to eat out of groups 1, 2, and 3. The one place where we might sometimes eat out of 4, and I just want you to think about this a little bit about how often you do it. Things like protein shakes. If you're buying any kind of keto products, already made up products, just have a think. Are they, some of those low carb keto breads? Maybe they're in group 3, where they're sort of recognizable, but not, not too processed. But think about, is there anything that you're buying or eating that's in that category 4 of highly processed? And the other thing I would ask you to think about is, whether the jury's out actually as to whether artificial sweeteners, and we know on keto things like erythritol, stevia, monk fruit are okay because they don't raise our insulin levels. But just have a think about how much of that you're eating. If you're just having the occasional bit, it's okay to have the occasional bit out of because that is a highly processed food. Well, stevia can or can't be depending on how it's processed, but potentially it's in that group 4 category. So just have a think about how much artificial sweetener you've got in your life, and also how much of that sort of highly processed food, even if it's keto, that you're using in your life, perhaps for convenience or perhaps because you're not keen on cooking, and just try and steer it to mostly group 1 with a bit of group 2 and a bit of group 3 thrown on in there. Because as we know, what we're trying to do with keto is we're trying to reduce the amount of carbohydrate that we have to less than 20 grams of net carbs per day. And that's not an upper limit. It is an upper limit, but it's not a target. We're not trying to get to 20 grams. We're just trying to stay underneath that. So if you only have 5 grams, even better, but we're not pushing hard about it. We're just trying to keep under that threshold. Then we're trying to have the right amount of protein for our lean body weight. So that's something like 1.5 grams per kilogram of lean body weight that you have. And then the rest of that is fat. And again, we're trying to eat to satiety. Satiety is when we're full. So we're not trying to load up on fats, particularly if we're trying to lose weight. The fat is really there to provide satiety to us, to make us feel full, so that we don't feel hungry, so that we don't overeat. It's not a question of, I haven't eaten my fat quota today. I'm not hungry, but I better eat a bit more. It's just to give us that feeling of satisfaction that we've eaten enough. Sorry, the guys are doing some works next door. I hope you can't hear it. It's a little bit noisy here. But I really wanted to pop in and talk to you about the processed food index, because I think that's just another way of looking at things, and hopefully a little bit interesting and just something to think about. So maybe next time you open the fridge or open the cupboard, go in and have a look, and instead of looking at it as whether it's carbs or fat or protein that's in your kitchen cupboard, have a think about whether it's group 1, group 2, group 3 or group 4. I'll be really interested for you to pop in the comments what you think is mostly in your cupboards. I know my fridge is basically group 1 for me. That's what's in my fridge pretty much, apart from maybe some mayonnaise, which I've made myself, which is group 2, I guess, or possibly group 3. And then my kitchen cupboards are pretty much full of sort of group 2 things, so condiments and things that I'm going to, spices that I'm going to add to my food. So tell me what's I'll be interested to know. Pop in the comments what's mostly in your fridge, what's mostly in your cupboard, do you think? And so just I wanted to come in and have a chat with you today. If you've got anything else that you want me to comment on, I know we've got a question in the group at the moment about what's a good brand of collagen to use. I'll have to do some research on that, because I'm in Australia. It's a bit different for us over here. We have different brands, but also I don't buy it because I make my own broth. But we'll do a bit of research on that and see if we can find an answer. But any questions that you have, please pop them in the group. It's a really friendly and helpful group. I love how you guys are, and I love being able to hopefully bring you things that you find interesting and helpful. So that's all I have for you today. It's getting a bit noisy outside, so I better sign off. So thanks, guys. See you soon.